Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Nurturing Astrology podcast. I'm Dominique Jaramillo, your astrologer and host. I believe astrology can fast-track personal growth, improve relationships, and empower parents. On this show, I will bring you practical guidance and insight from my own work, studies, and life experiences, as well as interview experts to bring you stellar wisdom from other teachers and professionals to inspire you on your journey. I'm so glad you're here and thanks for tuning in. So sit back, enjoy the show, and be sure to follow, like, and subscribe to catch every new episode as soon as it drops. Your shares and reviews are also much appreciated to help more people benefit from nurturing astrology. Okay, let's dive into today's show. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Nurturing Astrology podcast. I'm here with my friend and astrologer, mama, parenting expert, Maria Riegger. Hi, Maria.
Hi, Dominique. Thanks for having me.
Of course, I'm so glad to have you back. I know we've talked about doing a lot of great talks on different subjects. So we'll be seeing a lot. You'll be seeing a lot more of the two of us together, I think, because we have so many similar interests and topics we want to talk about that we thought it would be fun to do it together. And today we have a really, really powerful talk on attachment. This has been going around a lot, attachment styles. You know, I've had friends talking about it, and it's really like hip now. People are really diving into attachment styles. And of course, we can connect everything to astrology. I always go, oh, okay, how does that fit in, right? And so we want to dive into attachment styles, the types, you know, what it is, and offer some real tips and strategies for parents that we think are really important and some great resources. So let's just dive in because there's so much juiciness that we've like already kind of gathered and talked about that we want to be able to get it all in. So let's start with the definition of attachment. So the parent-child relationship with the purpose being to make the child feel safe, secure, and protected. And I was researching some articles, and from the British Journal, this Corinne Reese writes, attachment can be understood as being the enduring emotional closeness which binds families in order to prepare children for independence and parenthood, and that early attachment experiences creates internal working models or lifelong templates for preconceptions of the value and reliability of relationships, close or otherwise. So it's like getting our needs met, essentially, right? And that attachment is where the child, you know, basically has that primary caregiver secure base that they create that gives that foundation for exploring right out into the world or feeling safe to actually go out into the world. And I know there's a counterintuitive there-ness that we'll go into as well, but it's not always mom. And that's really important to remember as well, right? That it's whoever's there answering those needs, right? So what's your, you know, take on attachment? And then we'll go into like in general, and then we'll go into the styles and deeper into the tips and stuff.
Oh, wow. Yeah. So kind of the big way to think about it at first is that the parent-child relationship and the parents' relationship with each other, but mainly the parent-child relationship is the relationship model the child takes forth into their life when they grow up and then become an adult. So it is, like you said, Dominique, it's extremely formative. So when kids are babies, the attachment comes mostly from like physical closeness, right? Especially with a mom, just from the nature of if you're nursing, obviously it's a mom that does that. So you have the physical closeness. When kids are a little bit older, like toddlers, they still like to be hugged and cuddled. And as we'll go into it when we talk about the different astrological energies, different signs have can have slightly different needs. Those needs can vary a little bit. Some signs need more, more close physical touch than others. But that's how, attachment happens when you're kids are babies rather. Kids cry, the babies cry, they fuss, the parent picks them up and responding to their needs. It's good parenting is you respond to the baby's needs. And if the parents do not respond to the baby's needs that leave them crying in a crib, over time, they actually start to shut down and are diagnosed with something called failure to thrive, which is failure to eat, failure to gain weight, because they don't have the attachment.
Yeah.
So that's how important it is when they're babies.
Yeah.
Now, when kids get older, then adolescents, teenagers, they need the physical closeness less and less. They don't really need the, it's not, I don't want to say they don't need it. They don't seek out the physical touch and the hugs and stuff like that as much, right?
Yes.
Some kids still may, depending on the nature of the child.
Right.
But the attachment still needs to be present. And when kids are older, they like to know where the parent is, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you have kind of a two household situation, like I do, my son kind of goes back and forth to different his houses.
A lot of families do, right?
Right. A lot of, divorced families, blended families. It is important the child kind of is able to reach the parent and to know where they are. If the child calls the parent at the other house and doesn't get a response for several hours, even 24 hours, they can get anxious. Like, I don't know where my parent is. And that's indicative of the attachment. That's indicative of a pretty good attachment, because you want to know where the parent is. So it's important that the kids have a way of contacting the parents, or the parents let them know, hey, I'm going to be traveling today, so I won't be available by phone if you call. But you'll find that the kids like to know, even when they're older, where the parents are, but in the house or when they're out, right? So that's indicative of the close attachment. That's a good thing.
So that's a good signal. If your
Absolutely.
child is going, hey, I just want to know where you are, that's a healthy attachment, not like, what's the deal? Like, you're on your own. You need me anymore. It's like, okay, just be communicative about that, because that's a sign of a healthy attachment. They've bonded with you in that way, and it's healthy. And I mean, that's a win-win to me, because I want to know where they are too.
Exactly. And, obviously adolescents, teens are exerting more independence. That's normal for the development at that age, but they have the independence. That's great. And they still need guidance from parents. And where there's a healthy attachment, they will still come and seek out guidance and answers from the parents when they have questions, right?
Yes. Yeah. So we can really lay that groundwork early on. And I do think it's important to note that in the research that there becomes like almost a hierarchy of attachment too, based on various caregivers. So like you said, the mom and that contact and that, early bonding. And that's another thing. Bonding and attachment can become, those words can become interchangeable. In some sources, they're two different things. And in other sources, they are interchangeable. So on the one hand, the hierarchy is like you have mom or dad, perhaps a grandparent that lives in the home or takes care of a lot of times if a mom works, dad works, the kids go and stay with grandma. That becomes an attachment as well. And sometimes can even precede, if say the grandparent took care of the child, the attachment becomes with the grandparent, and that grandparent takes the hierarchy even above the parents sometimes. So that's natural. Whoever's meeting those needs, like you say, is where that core main attachment occurs. And then there's different levels with different people in the family, or nannies, or what have you, even outside the family. And then bonding, they had described in certain research I did as the, dad and son or dad and daughter playing outside, activities and things you do together that keep the relationship healthy and good and connected, is a little different than meeting those needs, right? So what is your differentiation with those two?
Right. I mean, the bonding activities you described certainly help to foster the healthy attachment.
Yeah.
So the attachment is, and you kind of hinted at this, Dominique, the kids have to attach to somebody. And when we say attach, they're like oriented toward, right? So you want them to be, I don't want to say you want kids to be. So in a healthy, ideal situation, the kids have a healthy, emotionally healthy relationship with the parents and are oriented toward the parents. That means they, take instruction and guidance from the parents. They, I want to say comply, but when the parents ask them to do something, they do it, right? Most of the time, because of the relationship. So when there's kind of a break or a disconnect in the attachment, the kids don't feel, the kids' needs are not getting met. And we're mostly talking about emotional needs here. They're not getting met somehow. They don't feel close to the parent. They will orient somewhere else.
Yes.
And in our modern society, and we'll talk about this when we get into Gabor Mate's book,
Yeah.
Hold On to Your Kids. In our modern society, a lot of the times kids orient toward their peers because
Right.
it's easier to do now with communication, texting, social media, all this stuff.
So
But
big.
that's very dangerous because the peers, don't have the child's best interest at heart. And the peers can often be abusive. I don't mean necessarily physically abusive,
Yeah.
but manipulative, emotionally manipulative, things like
Yes.
this. And then the parents usually seek out professional help when they're having problems relating to the child. The child is disrespecting them. And I don't mean just once in a while, right?
Yeah.
Disrespecting them repeatedly, ignoring them, refusing to spend time with them. That's indicative of a disconnect in the relationship. So you have to work on repairing the relationship and the attachment as opposed to laying down the law, putting, logical consequences, which, Gabor Mate says don't help the relationship at the end of the day.
Yes.
Rewards and punishments don't help the relationship at the end of the day. That it's just, you may get compliance, sometimes short-lived or even longer-lived compliance. But when somebody does something because they're, threatened with punishments or because of a reward, it's often it's not a conscious choice, right? So at the end of the day, it doesn't help the relationship. You're not getting to the root of what's going on, and that often can be it's this disconnect in the parental attachment, and the kid is starting to attach and orient toward other people. Now, it's healthy for children to have relationships with their peers,
Of course.
right?
Yeah. Yes.
And relationships with grandparents and extended family and all this stuff, right? But we're talking about the main orientation, the main attachment. And in a healthy, ideal situation, that's with the parents, right? And whether they're divorced or together or there's a blended family or not, ideally, that healthy attachment orientation is first toward the parents.
Absolutely. Yeah. And peers are so important. They become more and more important to even our children's growth process, getting out in the world and comparing ideas and, beliefs and things that their peers have. But that healthy orientation to the family, to the parents is so important because the peers are not, unconditionally loving them and nurturing them, not coming from that place. It's just natural. They're kids. They don't even have the consciousness or awareness to come at things. You definitely have different kids' natures who are more kind or, empathic and things like that. But ultimately, they're not coming from that same, place. And since we're doing that, we'll touch on the types and go into the astrology after. But since we're already talking about Gabor Mate, I think we should go into his work and the things that he talks about attachment because they're so rich and important. And Maria turned me on to this book, Hold On to Your Kids, Why Parents Need to Matter More Than Peers. And it is powerful. And he even talks about I've just scratched the surface about how important this is starting really early on. You know what I mean? So even if you don't have peers, like you don't have a teen or anything like that where the peers are more and more important, but at any age, it's just powerful information. And you had already gone through and pulled out some really important points for parents to be aware of when it comes to attachment. So let's dive into those and then we can go into the styles and maybe some of the astrology, but just to give the real root and importance of some of the key things that he says about attachment.
Sure thing. So you may have heard of Gabor Mate. He's a very well-known physician and a trauma recovery specialist. So he is basically his kind of life mission is to help people cope and heal from their trauma to then have fulfilling lives. So he's a medical doctor and a Holocaust survivor, and he had a very kind of interesting backstory as to why he got interested in attachment, parental child attachment. So when his mother, who was Jewish, this is during the time of the in Eastern Europe Jews are being persecuted, obviously. So his mother was fleeing the family home and had little Gabor. He was either an older baby or a young toddler at the time. I don't remember his exact age, but he was like I want to say 2 to 3 around that time. And she literally had to flee her home and wanted to hide him. And she actually handed him to a stranger in a doorway, this woman, and said, I I need you to take care of my baby until I can come back and get him, because she didn't want anything to happen to him. And for several weeks, he was without his parents, being cared for by these strangers, until his mother was able to come back and get him safely.
Wow.
So that, disconnect where he obviously is too young to understand. But my point here is, even though a child may be too young to understand what's happening, they know the parent's not there. The primary caregiver who they've been used to is not there, and that's very traumatic. And later in life, Gabor Mate noted, after working several years as a physician, he had, these own attachment trauma issues himself, and he dealt with them. Now he realizes he dealt with them in a way that many people, including myself, have dealt with, which is you basically overachieving to the point of burnout, right? To prove your own worth to yourself and to people around you, right? And that's some of that's an effect that some of these attachment issues can have on adults. So this is kind of what prompted his work in this area. So he's kind of the primary, at least my primary source for kind of any attachment issues, positive parenting. And a lot of what he teaches, like you mentioned earlier, Dominique, can seem a little counterintuitive. So it is tough for parents. It's tough for parents to put these things into practice, because a lot of things in our society and the schools work against them. Like, your kids are in school for 8 or 9 hours a day, right? Maybe 6 to 9 hours a day, depending on where you are, right? Depending. Right. So they don't see you, right? But you still have to maintain the attachment. And a really good indicator of a healthy attachment is, for example, parenting involvement at the kids' school, volunteering. When the kids are little, you go, read in their classes. Yeah, I did too. There was a time when my son was like in second grade, and he would ask me to go have lunch with him almost every day. And I was thinking, oh my gosh, I have a full-time job. This is tough. But it was a very tough time for us as a family. And I was like, I'm going to do this as often as I can, because he clearly needs me there, right? And kids will not come out and say, hey, I'm feeling really disconnected from you. Could we work on our attachment? Kids will say, because they just don't have the sophistication yet, obviously.
Right.
They will say, can you come have lunch with me at school? They will say, can you watch a show with me?
Right.
Do you want to read with me?
Yeah.
Right. Will you play a game with me? That is a bid for connection. And you really need to meet the bid for connection. And if you can't, you need to explain, I would love to. I need to finish what I'm doing, and then I will be right with you. Right. So you want to be careful that how you're acting is not rejecting the bid for connection. So so you really have to read between the lines. But anyway, I'm kind of getting ahead of myself. So
no, that's okay. Good stuff.
But right. So as Gabor Mate says in his book, and I've read this other places too, often when kids start to become more oppositional than usual, the parent reaction is to kind of lay down the law, be stricter, right? Things like that. And he says that basically that's the wrong reaction. The response the parent should have is to kind of figure out what's going on with the child, like repair the relationship, right? Repair the connection. Don't, emotionally overreact. It's hard not to take it personally because you're a kid, but something is wrong with the relationship, and you have to figure out and address what that is. Right. And it's often, if the child's old enough, that involves sitting down and talking to the child calmly and being like, is there anything you want to talk about? And that you may not resolve everything in one conversation. Right. It may take several days until the child is like, oh, my mom is not mad at me for not doing these things. And maybe now I feel comfortable enough telling her something. Right. But anyway, the main takeaway from that is you need to work on repairing when they're really oppositional, things like that. You need to work on repairing the attachment in the relationship. Something's amiss in the relationship.
Got it. Oh, that's a good one.
Yeah. What else?
And trust was a really big one, right?
Yes. So I come across a lot of parents, to get my notes in front of me, I come across a lot of parents who seem like their default reaction is just to mistrust the kids all the time. Mm-hmm. Okay. And I understand kids lie for various reasons. In my experience, I think the biggest reason they lie is to avoid getting in trouble and avoid the parent like losing their stuff, overreacting, right? Mm-hmm. Okay. Mm-hmm. So, but Gabor Mate's point is that you trust your kids. They're worthy of trust because of the relationship. They're worthy of trust, so trust them. Don't assume they're, not trustworthy. Okay. Um,
That's a good point.
right. He says it is children's natural desire to be good for us that warrants our trust, not their ability to perform to our expectations. Right. That's the key. And I'll point something else out that I read a while ago by Mark Manson, who is the author of The Subtle Art of Giving an F and many other books. And he said, and I think this really rings true, he said that people who are incapable of trusting are not trustworthy. So, kids are very instinctual. They
Mm,
instinctually know this. And if the parent never trusts the kids learn quickly the parent is not trustworthy, because a
wow.
person who cannot trust is not worthy of trust.
Wow. Yeah.
So my recommendation is to trust your kids, and if you catch them in a lie, address it. Like, I heard something different, or is there a reason you were not truthful about this? And
Yes.
it may just be because they didn't want to get in trouble. And if that's the case, thank you for being honest with me. But I'd like to be able to trust you. And if you want me to continue to trust you, I need you to tell me the truth. Right. Things like
Yes.
that. Right.
Oh,
But the
yeah.
default response should be parents should trust their kids.
Absolutely. And that trust and responsibility goes hand in hand too, right? Because I always,
Mm-hmm.
I always tell my son that, I trust you and I know you're responsible. I know you make good choices. There needs to be, you know, proof, like you keep working towards certain things, like the more you do the things that you're responsible for, whether it's your schoolwork or the things you need to do around the house, the more freedom you have, the more I trust you, I give you that freedom to do the things that you need to do, then I have more trust and then you get more freedom, so
Right.
I know that there's that thing where they're feeling like there's a, I don't know, like a disconnect or a challenge, like, oh, if you don't trust me, if you're not trust me, I can't do what I want to do. Once
Right.
you're like, no, that's not it. It's just there's certain things that we need to do, we're required to do. We have responsibilities and obligations, and yours. It's not that I don't trust you, that you can't get it done, but I need to see that you're doing X, Y, and Z. Then I can know I don't have. It's more hands off when I know I can trust
Right.
you,
Right.
right?
Right. And I mean, they say kids like adolescents to teenagers, their brains are wired so that in such a way that makes them, they have poor impulse control.
Mm-hmm.
They are very forgetful. I hear that all the time. My kid never remembers anything. Yeah, because that's naturally where their brains are at right now. Like, they can
Yes,
only meet you where they are developmentally. So
exactly.
gentle reminders, or make yourself a list. If you're forgetting it, make a list, check
Mm,
it off, things like that. So there are things you can do to help that. But
yeah,
that's all developmentally normal.
yeah, exactly. That's a good thing to remember in terms of development, because I know that, for my son, he'll feel bad and start beating himself up if he doesn't
Right.
remember things,
Right.
instead of recognizing, hey, it's okay. That's why you have a checklist or thing, I'm
Mm-hmm.
reminding you, I'm not mattering, I'm just reminding you because I know you can easily
Right.
forget, because then gets upset at himself and thinks, oh, something's wrong with me, right? Or
Right.
I'm not being good, or I'm not, being this, or I'm disappointing you. And I'm like, that's not it. It's just where you are right now. You need these reminders. It's good to have a list. It's good to, like, so I think that grows with age. But that's really good. Let's see, what are these other things that we have here? It's so much great
Sure.
stuff about
I
attachment
know.
with him.
And it's a great book too. Highly recommend reading the book. It is quite dense. There's just a lot of information
Yes.
there, but it's all extremely worthwhile to read. Another big thing that Gabor Mate points out, which is kind of one of his big tenets he talks about, is, if the parent has unresolved trauma from their own childhood, like we talked about the attachments,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
The parent has an insecure attachment, the parent has unmet needs from childhood, unresolved trauma, they're going to transfer that on. Most likely they're going to transfer that on to the relationship with the child, and they will act in a dynamic with the child that's not always emotionally healthy. That could be guilting the child because of the attachment,
Mm-hmm.
manipulating the child. Even if their intention is not to manipulate, this is all unconscious behavior, right?
Yeah.
Treating the relationship as quid pro quo. Well, I'll do this for me if you do this for you. And one of the big points that Gabor Mate says is you should never use the attachment, right, to guilt trip a child, manipulate a child into doing anything for you.
Oh,
You
yeah.
never, because that's setting them up for a very unhealthy relationship dynamic later in life. So it's about
Right.
unconditional acceptance, unconditional love. Like if you don't perform to my expectations, that does not change how I feel about you. That does not
Yes.
change my love for and acceptance of you.
Yeah.
Right? That's the unconditional positive regard they talk about in psychology, right? I accept you how you are. I love you how you are. Now, as an adult, you may have your own boundaries and deal breakers. That's a completely different story. You are
Right.
allowed and you should have your boundaries and deal breakers. But
Yeah.
as far as acceptance of your child, you accept them how you are, how they are. It does not mean there will not be natural consequences to some of their actions,
Mm-hmm.
but that those consequences or their actions will not change how you feel about the child, right?
Yes. Yes.
And on that point, Gabor Mate says, and this is kind of one of the tenets of positive parenting too, that logical consequences, rewards, and punishments really don't work to help the relationship. They don't really work to help the attachment. Natural consequences are the best teacher, and those don't even involve, the involvement of the parent. Natural
Yeah.
consequences, for example, it's cold outside, you forget your coat, you're going to be cold. You
Yeah.
don't study for a test, you bomb the test, you bomb. Yeah, that's the natural consequence. If you're mean to your friends while you're gaming with them, they're not going to want to play with you, right? I mean,
Right.
these are
Right.
this is the best way for the kid to learn kind of how to relate in society. Okay,
Mm.
the kind of rewards and punishment cycle. If you do your homework, you'll get, I don't know, $5. Or if you whatever, if you don't do what I tell you to do, then you can't game the rest of the day. Those don't work to help the relationship or the attachment. You may get compliance, you may even
Right.
get long-term compliance, but just because something is effective, technically effective, does not mean it is emotionally or psychologically healthy for the
Mm-hmm.
relationship and the attachment. Okay. It also suggests that the relationship, again, is a quid pro quo. I do this for you and you do this for me. And that's not what it's about. It's
Mm.
about mutual respect, mutual acceptance. That's what it's about. I mean, if your kid, for example, is disrespectful to you, yes, tell them, hey, you're being kind of disrespectful right now, or you're hurting my
Yeah.
feelings right now.
Yeah.
Totally fine. I mean, kids are, they're not robots. They're going to have
Right.
moments where they're
Of
irritated with you. But
course.
if there's a healthy attachment, they're going to come back and say, hey, I'm sorry. Or they're going to cool off and
Right.
say, I'm sorry I lost my temper. I'm sorry I snapped at you. I'm sorry I said that. And you say, thank you for the apology. And then you move on. You don't dwell on it. Okay. The
Yeah.
whole takeaway in this are kind of the logical consequences. By logical consequences, we mean kind of the reward cycle. Like if you, or the punishment cycle, if you don't do your chores I told you to do, you won't get to game today. That's
Mm.
not a natural consequence. That's a parent imposed consequence. And Gabor
Gotcha.
Mate's point is that those things, even though they may get short-term compliance, they don't help the attachment. You want to maintain a strong attachment and a strong relationship where the child feels safe, comfortable interacting with you, their needs are met, not just physical needs, their emotional and psychological needs are met, and they will naturally look to the parent for guidance and instruction because of that relationship, right?
Gotcha. Okay, so I have some follow-up questions. So I'm listening to this and I'm thinking to myself, okay, well, there is also this. I talk to a lot of clients when we're talking about them following rules or being responsible in negotiating, coming up with the consequences of not doing what you're supposed to do, what your chores or your homework or what have you, and making them agree to those consequences so that when they don't do what they're supposed to do or handle their responsibilities, that they agree that that's the consequence. So where does that, it seems to me kind of like that attachment is a little bit different than maybe the negotiating what are our responsibilities and what are the consequences, and working on an agreement plan, if you will, with
Mm-hmm.
the child. So letting them be involved in what
Mm-hmm.
are going to be the natural consequences if you don't get your homework done, and
Right.
having them agree to it so that it's not like this seeking compliance, but rather
Mm-hmm.
saying, hey, I respect you and I want you to learn how to manage your own life and your responsibilities and be independent.
Mm-hmm.
So let's negotiate what should it be, and we both agree to it, so that you can say when they don't do it, you said you would do it, you agreed to this, you know what I mean, and it allows them to take responsibility. So how does that fall into attachment in your opinion?
So you're talking about, Dominique, if I understand correctly, the parent sitting down with a child talking about, for example, they don't do their homework, there's going to be some logical consequence, parent imposed consequence, like you don't have screen time the rest of the day, for example.
Yeah, but they have
Is
to
that correct?
agree on it.
But they
Yeah,
have
like
to agree on it.
agreed upon.
Um, my personal feeling, I'm not a huge proponent of logical consequences at all. So
Or how about incentives?
yeah,
In terms of like,
incentives.
hey, like, oh, if you get certain grades, if you're
Yeah,
doing well, or you've done certain
right.
things that you're doing. So for example, my son
Yeah.
is got to do more reading in class. He's needs a little bit work in that area. So it's like, okay, if you do a little bit more work, if you're reading every night like you're supposed to,
Mm-hmm.
like, then you have then you can game a little longer, or then you can, like,
Sure.
those kinds of
Sure.
things, like incentives. Like, I do
Sure.
believe incentives work,
Right.
right?
Right.
Like you were
Right.
saying about giving them $5 or something, right? So
Right.
what's the difference then between like negotiating a
Right.
logical consequence and also an incentive program?
I got you. So positive reinforcement works better than negative reinforcement for sure.
Okay,
100%.
good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's fine. So I'm not going to sit here and say that I don't ever believe in doing a reward,
Yeah.
right? I've done it. In fact, I've done incentives before, and I think looking back at it, I don't think I handled it the right way. I don't think I should have
Mm.
given an incentive, like a monetary incentive. That I think I made a mistake. So I don't think I would do that again. So, but I'm not going to say you should never do an incentive, like, because if the kid meets some challenge and you
Right.
say, let's, we're going to celebrate your win here by doing
Yeah.
X, I don't see a problem with
Yeah.
that
Your
personally.
improvement or what have you.
Yeah, I think if it's overdone, like, I don't believe, and I've read this, other positive parenting experts agree with this for the most part. Like, I don't believe in, for example, paying kids for kind of routine chores.
Yeah.
You do chores to help the family, right? Help the
Yes.
team, and you're going to have to do this for yourself one day.
Yes.
Now, if there's like a special project and
Agreed.
you can agree on all, this will be your payment for this project, one time project, that's a different story. But
Right.
paying for routine chores, no.
Totally agree.
Paying for grades, I've done it, but I don't think I should have. So let's just say that. So
I'll make
because
this.
I
Yeah.
think, because my kid loves learning like I do, and I want that to be an intrinsic motivation,
Yes.
right? And that's the problem. The problem with rewards is that if they're overdone, the kids are looking for extrinsic external motivation. And if there is no external motivation, they won't
Do it.
do it. So
Right.
the motivation at the end of the day has to come from them internally. I have the thing about grades, I don't believe in punishing for bad grades. Figure
Yeah.
out what's happening.
Right.
Modern school system is not the right approach for a lot of kids. It's just
Right.
not,
Right.
right? It induces compliance to get through the material,
Mhm.
and that's not how a lot of kids do best, frankly. So
Yep.
um so the bad grades or less than perfect grades are an indication that the kid is having some kind of trouble you have to get to. I don't believe, and on top of the trouble they're having, you're going to punish them for that. I
Yeah.
personally don't believe in punishing
I
for
agree.
grades. Same reason I don't believe in, like, I don't think it's a good idea to reward just, A's and B's, for example, through payment. Now, a big milestone, some really big win,
Yes.
some really big accomplishment to celebrate that, yes, absolutely, that's great. But you have to be careful about using the rewards, because some parents, because it's easier, and I've been there too, my kid was younger, it's easier to instill the reward so the kids will do what they're supposed to do. But
Yeah.
when that becomes too frequent, now the internal motivation is lost. And
Yeah.
when they're adults, they're going to have a hard time summing up that internal motivation when they have to do what things that they need to do. So
Yeah.
that's the big risk with that. And as far as negotiating logical consequences, again, if it's grade related, I don't agree with that. Like,
Yeah.
if you don't do your homework, you're not going to get screen time.
I think it
If you
could
don't do
be
your
things
homework,
like,
you get a zero. You get a
right.
zero. That's the
Well, I
consequence.
think it could also be like in terms of learning how to, speak kindly to your siblings, be respectful, not, hitting, if there's, things that are harmful, if you're hitting your sister, or like, different things that are like hard lines,
Right.
those kinds of things. But it sounds to me like I'm kind of getting the feeling now that's like, well, if you have a healthy attachment and you really are coming from that, these should be a lot of issues that that naturally fall away, right? Could
That's
naturally
the
fall
idea.
away,
Yeah.
and you don't have these issues to contend with if there's this healthy attachment. And I would say that, if we go into, even at this point, like the 4 attachment styles, there could be the first one being secure attachment, right? And that is, the child believes and trusts their needs will be met,
Right.
and so they can then develop healthy attachment and healthy relationship skills and social emotional behavior down the line. I do think there's a slippery slope with doing too much, and then then you lead into that helicopter parent, and then they're like incapable. So I think that's slippery slope too. So it's like secure attachment is just, I feel like it's a development of allowing your child to do the things that they're capable of doing when they're capable of doing, to encourage that. But basically it's about really meeting their needs and knowing you're there for them always. And
exactly.
that's the biggest thing, right? And then in an avoidant attachment, so then you have an avoidant attachment, which is, there's sort of a distant engagement, that they kind of subconsciously believe that their needs aren't going to be met necessarily. So they are distant and have a harder time attaching and having healthy relationships later, right?
Right.
And then
they avoid those entanglements.
Right. They're like maybe commitment phobic. They don't want to get close. They don't want to be intimate, those kinds of things. And then you have ambivalent attachment and disorganized attachment, which are kind of a combination of the two, right? The inconsistent sometimes there, and then the extreme, like, disorganized parent, and which I find is really fascinating. Well, first, before we go into that, share with me your thoughts on the 4 types and your understanding of them.
Sure. So you summed it up nicely, Dominique. I'll add a couple things. So you can have somebody who exhibits avoidant attachment and anxious attachment, right? And that can be, if that's an adult in an adult relationship, the other person in the relationship could wind up being very confused, because sometimes this person is distant, and some doesn't seem interested, and sometimes this person is like overly clingy, almost codependent. So you can have that too, and that's evidence of kind of this disorganized message they got from their parents. Right. So yeah, absolutely. And essentially, it's hard to have 100% secure attachment, because no parent is perfect, right? So if you have kind of an avoidant, or you have somebody who has an avoidant or anxious attachment, you are not alone, man. There are a lot of people who have those issues. So a lot of this, if you're an adult with those attachment issues in a relationship, you got to communicate with your partner, right? And you may need a more, reinforcement and acceptance from your partner occasionally because of the attachment. But if you communicate with your partner and they know this, they're not gonna take it as you just not being interested or you being distant. It's kind of just indicative of these issues.
I had some girlfriends over for dinner, and a couple of them were talking about dating and their relationships and reflecting on that, and learning about attachment and realizing that a lot of the relationship issues they're having themselves or their partner they're noticing has to do with their attachment style, and which is mom, right? And they were reflecting on their relationships with their parents or their mom in particular, to kind of assess where they were at or how they were coming at, and like what happens when this person does this, and then how do I respond based on my attachment style, right? So I couldn't help but, of course, like see the correlation between parenting style and attachment, and then how that actually can be then imprinted on how our children engage in relationship or not as they grow up, right? So whenever I look to parenting style, obviously I think part of it, a good part of looking at the astrology for attachment is the moon. We always look at the moon in terms of what our child needs to feel safe and secure. And that's a good indicator of how your child might need or what they might need to attach, right? To really have that healthy attachment. And when you have different moons, then there's definitely maybe a difference there. Maybe it's not as easy for you to give your child what they need, but we are the parent. We can understand that and then make some adjustments, right? And then you can look to the aspects maybe that the moon makes to kind of get a little bit more insight into your parenting style, or look at your moon and reflect on your own relationship with your mother and your family and how you felt, and you know, in terms of that attachment style. And for example, like I know like a moon Uranus can have a lot of things going on, and that mom can be, you know, scattered and disorganized, and so naturally or subconsciously can create that because they're just so busy, they're not able to be there. Or a mom who has to go right back to work, you know, and there's a lot of cultural and just life things. And then there's also their own attachment style based on the way they were raised. So there's this lineage, right? And so we're dealing with that. I think that brings it back to Gabor, where we're really working on our own trauma and our own stuff so that we can be better at helping to create that healthy attachment with our own children. It is a cycle, right, of evolution and growth that we're all on, and we're all doing the best we can with what we know. And things like Gabor's book and astrology, these are all things that we can look to as great resources and tools for helping us. And also the you know, we understand more about how our children perceive us by their moon. Right. So when we look at our child's moon, that's how they see us. And that's why when you look at your two different children, if you have more than one, they all different moons, or similar, they're perceiving you in a similar light. Right. And then the aspects of their moon are kind of like add to that perception. So it's not necessarily that you're not parenting well, or you're not doing certain things, you know, in a healthy way, but they still can be perceived differently.
Because of the nature of the child. I mean, the child has different energy, right? So yeah, they're gonna, and that it's very interesting. But you can have children who grow up in the same household who have different experiences.
Absolutely.
And I mean that it is amazing, but it happens all the time.
Yes, absolutely. And we can't, you know, this is where I feel like in a way astrology can give, there's these two sides where astrology can really give parents a leg up. And at the same time, if we're not really like compassionate and have a lot of understanding and self-love, can be scary, or a way of like, oh, I suck, or I can't, I'm doing this right, or it's, you know. So I like to try and give the information as a tool for self-acceptance, and information that can help you on your own journey, and therefore do the best you can with your child. But we're all on our own journey, and it's hard to be like, oh man, like you're saying, oh, I messed that up, I probably shouldn't have done that. He's gonna survive, like he's gonna adjust, like but I know how moms feel when you're in that, like, oh, I want to do the best I can for my kid. And the best way to do that is to really reflect on our own journey, our own upbringing. You know, are we trying to emulate our parents? Are we trying to do the opposite of what our parents did? You know, this is all part of the process. And you can even look at relationship patterns that you've had in your life, and then associate that to, well, oh, interesting. I'm, you know, everyone, they make those, you know, the saying about, you know, women are always looking for their dad, or men are always looking for their mom, you know, or avoiding that, you know what I mean? Those are all, I think, indicative of the attachment style, wouldn't you say?
Oh yeah. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Because you're going to emulate the relationship that was modeled for you. Right.
Or and if avoid having one.
Exactly. Or avoid having one altogether, because in your mind, relationships always bring suffering and crib your freedom and independence. So why would you want that?
Yeah. So, or relationships end, or people leave, or, you know, abandonment issues, all of those types of things.
All of those things. Yeah. These are all right. Exactly. So like you said, you're, you know, afraid of commitment.
Yeah.
You always have an exit strategy, that kind of thing. I mean,
you don't feel totally secure and safe in relationship, you know, because of your experiences. I know that for me and my husband, I really, doing the research and looking at our life stories and our background, realized that we actually create and like bring the security that neither one of us had as children to
Exactly.
each other and
Right.
our relationship. And it's built on that, and trying to
Right.
provide that for our children, for our children, we only have one, that we didn't get. And not
Right.
out of blame or, anger or anything like that from our past, but simply just recognizing this was our experience, having
Right.
passion for our parents and their lives and what brought us to where we are based on those experiences.
Oh yeah.
And then saying, but we have choice and we can do it different, and we can work on our issues, individually, together, and do better. And I think it's a process, but that's the goal, right? And
Absolutely.
that's the effort anyway that we're putting in, regardless.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think that it's really indicative. I found it fascinating that more and more people are looking to and trying to uncover their own attachment issues, that or issues they have in relationships based on their relationships with their parents. It's
Mm-hmm.
I mean, in therapy, you always sit down and start talking about your childhood. I mean, there's a
Mm-hmm.
reason for that, right? It's just
Right.
connected to everything, and attachment is
Right.
like so big, you know? So, and let's just touch on now. I think we're going to go into individual videos, I think, to make it easier to dive into like attachment for the different elements, because that's
Mm-hmm.
always a great, broader perspective to go into it. We were going to talk about for sure babies that are water babies, and definitely there are difference. I think you were saying that all the children attach.
Mm-hmm.
It might just be in different ways. So obviously we have fire signs, earth, water, and air. So
Mm-hmm.
let's just touch on a few of like the elements individually and give a few tips, and then we can go really deeper into future videos for parents to like dive into.
Sounds great.
Yeah. So let's talk about fire children, right? So if you've got Aries, Leo, Sag kids, whether they're moon or sun are in a fire sign,
Mm-hmm.
excuse me, or there is just a strong dominance of that energy, the attachment style is going to be different, right?
Right.
They might not need as much touchy feely. They might want a lot more freedom and independence, and that's a way of attaching with that. How would you see fire?
Right. I think that's right, Dominique. So fire being a masculine energy side, it's more of a doing energy, right, than the sensitive kind of
Mhm.
intuitive energy of the feminine energy signs, the earth and the water signs.
Yeah.
So with fire sign kids, whether fire sun or fire moon, they tend to be very independent and ego oriented, and that is not necessarily a bad thing. That's a great
Right.
thing because that gives
Healthy
them a
ego.
strong right, that gives them a strong sense of identity, right, and of self, which
Mm.
is fantastic. They're very passionate about experiencing everything life has to offer, and I say they almost like attack life, right, especially Aries and Sag people. Leo's a fixed fire sign, so it has this tendency too, but I find in practice like maybe the tendency is a little bit lessened. But fire signs in general have this propensity to kind of attack life, right?
Yeah.
So the parent should, certainly when the kids start to get older, support all their endeavors and their passions. They may be very passionate about something for a while and then be passionate about something else. Encourage them to explore different things, explore their passions, explore everything life has to offer, things like that. So if you're more of kind of an introvert parent like me, you're going to have to remember that, and remember that maybe that's going to take you outside of your comfort zone because
Mm-hmm.
you don't have the same kind of propensity maybe to attack life and be very
Yeah.
social. Fire sign people, I find a lot of the time have kind of an entourage about them, like they have a lot of friends and like contacts.
Entourage. I like that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so that may, again, if you're an introvert parent, you're just going to have to kind of accept the fact your fire sign child is probably going to have a lot of friends. Encourage them to spend time with their friends, things like that. So definitely the kind of supporting their activities. A great way to bond with them, the bonding activity we talked about earlier, is to engage in physical activity with them. Fire sign kids, especially the boys, have a ridiculous amount of energy to burn off, even more than kind of the average adolescent boy.
Mm-hmm.
Engaging in physical activities, that's a great way to bond. Boys especially bond through competitive activities and physical activities. So anything the parent can do that combines those things. It's a physical activity. It's also got some element of competition. Great things to do to bond with the fire sign kids, right?
Gotcha.
They are more independent. So when they're older, they may not, or at least it may not appear to you that they need the presence of the parent as much as other
Right.
kids. They still need the parent. They're still going to come to the parent for guidance and things. Just don't be surprised if they exhibit a lot of independence.
Yeah.
And you should not push a kid to be independent before they're ready. But fire signs, the other propensity is to just be independent, so they're probably going to seek the independence as early as possible, right?
Yeah, so my thoughts to add to that are, the one thing is, if you're a parent, first of all, who maybe wants a little bit more of the emotional connection or the physical touch, and they're, not wanting to, we say they grow out of that in some respects, but a fire sign may not really need it. They'll sleep independently, not really need a lot of cuddles, and you'll be like, could potentially feel that something is wrong with that, or that hurts your feelings, or you're not getting what you want out of the relationship. So
Right.
having some compassion, understanding that that's the way that they attach, and not allowing that to hurt your feelings. And then also, the other thing that popped into my mind was the Hold On to Your Kids book, because with a child that's fire and has a lot of friends and that entourage thing, that they may more easily start to orient to friends or the groups and stuff like that, right? To their counterparts in that way rather than the parent. So
Right.
even though we say like not to, there's like that hierarchy authority of being friends with your kids or playing with your kids and stuff like that. So this seems like a situation where getting in there and having some fun and play
Oh yeah.
is a great way to have that attachment, and create that healthy attachment with fire sign kids who are naturally like, freedom loving and independent.
Right.
And
Right.
you have to also look to their moon. They're look to
Right.
where their emotional element is, the water, or where, if they have any of that, and so where their emotional development is and how you can support that, because they could be missing that element, or all about the fire, and so they avoid talking about emotions, being emotional. So you can also be a teacher, I think, to help them understand and balance, the understanding other people's emotions or feelings. And because when they get into relationship, that's going to be a challenge for them if they don't know how to bond or attach, or if they become parents. So this is I think communication is key in my book all the time. As soon as you can start communicating with your child,
Yeah.
in those ways, are great conversation to have, like respecting their desire and need for freedom, and allowing as much of that as possible, and also showing them and be an example of the importance of sharing feelings or emotions, and bonding in those other ways.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Right. And fire signs, I find like Leo and Sag mostly very like demonstrably affectionate too.
Yeah.
They do like affection even as older kids. Like they like to hug and things like that.
Yeah,
so
we
it's
don't
not
want to
that they
stereotype.
Yeah, it's not that they don't want the physical contact. It's just that as they get older, they may need it less because of everything you're talking about, Dominique.
Yeah.
Yeah, and also because fire energy is very impulsive, it's the type of energy to act first, right? Without, when you think of a sign like Capricorn, which is very calculating, they don't make any moves that are not calculated or well thought out. Fire energy is very different. Fire energy is very impulsive, which is great because they're like, quick to defend their friends. They're very loyal to the parents. That's another great quality. Fire signs very loyal to the parents.
Yeah.
But because of the impulsivity, again, natural consequences are an excellent teacher. Fire sign kids will learn better through natural consequences than the parents like dictating or telling them, well, if you do this, this is going to happen. Well, let them do it. Let them experience what happens. They'll learn better that way, obviously within a reason, right? Nothing too serious. But right, they'll learn better through natural consequences than the parent kind of nagging or being like, dictating to them things. Because they're very, fire energy is very headstrong and independent. So they'll learn more from the life experience than from the parents telling them. It's not that they won't learn at all from having discussions with the parents.
Yeah.
But they kind of have to experience things themselves
Yeah.
first, right?
And also they have great, positive energy, right? So there's a lot of
Yes,
positivity and
very optimism. A lot
optimistic.
of optimism.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And I
yeah,
think that's an important thing to be aware of, because a lot of times when you have an easy child, you can easily neglect them unconsciously because they're so independent and you think
oh
they
yeah,
don't
oh
need
yeah,
it. And so it's easy to miss signals, or to not be there when, or recognize that you are needed, because they are positive and seem to not be in need of that. So I think that's something to always be aware of, that even if your child is very outgoing and positive, optimistic, and seems like nothing bothers them, that that's a little bit of to me a flag of like, hey,
mm-hmm.
let me just make sure I'm having conversations with my child, and that they're, when a situation happens where you see that this would naturally upset someone and they don't seem to be upset about it or concerned, maybe
Right,
that's a conversation to have, or a way to
mm-hmm.
approach that, so they can talk about, hey, it's okay to be mad, it's okay if that bothered you or that hurt your feelings, those things are okay. So, considering that opposite, right, that opposite
Right,
sign of just them being easy, because I think that's a pitfall when you have an
right,
easy child.
right,
And fire signs can be very positive and outgoing and friendly and seem like they don't need a lot from
mm-hmm.
you, that they seem
Mm-hmm.
to be, managing or happy or easy, impulsive. And then you have the other side where it's like so much fire that you can't control them. And there's like this
Right,
steamroller or persistence where you're like,
right,
okay, like you need to learn how to rein it in and manage
right,
your anger or your
right,
frustration or things like that. So we have to
right,
be, teachers. And that's where observation and, the astrology can really help us looking at the full picture, and
mm-hmm.
then observation and really paying attention. I think
Right,
parents have to be real good observers and
mm-hmm.
listeners more than
Oh
anything
yeah,
else.
oh absolutely. You need to, demonstrate to your child that you are listening to them and hearing them,
Yeah.
right? You're not
Yeah.
just waiting for your turn to talk. Because I mean, everybody, children, adults want to feel heard and understood at the end of the day. And that, to your point, Dominique, that is one of the basics of the healthy attachment.
Yeah.
Does your child feel that you are hearing them, right?
Mm-hmm.
Listening to and
Yes.
hearing them.
Yeah. So
Right.
let's go into air, the other
Sure.
masculine sign, since we're talking in that
Sure.
general realm anyway. There are some similarities in those masculine energies there, but air is your Gemini, right? And your Libra, and then Aquarius,
Mm-hmm.
right? So
Right.
let's talk about how air signs might bond, how those signs might feel healthy attachment.
Sure. So air signs bond at least partly through talking.
Yeah.
Especially if the kids have their moon in an air sign, they're going to bond through verbal expression of ideas. And sun, both sun and moon air signs, but especially moon air signs, not everything that comes out of their mouth is necessarily their truth. A lot of the times they're like verbally working through things,
Yeah.
right? So the parent can hear something and be like floored, like, I didn't know this. But you have to understand that just because your child is verbally expressing it, that they it's not necessarily their truth, 100% their truth. They could be just thinking about things or working things out for themselves, or sometimes testing the parent's reaction, right? Air
Right.
signs like to do that too. So you have to be careful not to kind of overreact to that. I used to be like, what are you talking about? And then I realized, oh, he's just, because my son has a Gemini moon, and
Mm-hmm.
he's just kind of testing these out, right? It's not that he believes this,
Right.
right? So you
Yeah.
have to be careful about that. But yes, talking with them is a great way to bond, because and they'll ask you questions like, what do you think about this, or what would you do if this? They ask a lot of hypothetical questions, and this is how they bond, because of conversation with the parent, right, about all
Yeah.
kinds of things. So that's a great way to bond. They're also pretty independent.
Mm-hmm.
Of all the signs, I think air signs are more or less best able to kind of entertain themselves when the parents are busy, like whether it's just daydreaming or
Sure.
reading or looking at a magazine. They usually can find,
Mm-hmm.
at the least, they're daydreaming, right? If they don't have access to anything
Yeah.
else, they have
Yeah.
a very rich kind of inner world, right? um so they also tend not to need the physical proximity of the parent when they're older as much as like water sign and earth sign kids do, because of the independence. Again, still need the parent, still
They
need
appreciate
guidance from the
phone
parent.
calls.
Yeah, they do. Yeah, they do. Um, And also because these children are always thinking, it is very common for them to have this kind of mental paralysis from the overthinking, like don't know what to do or constantly weighing pros and cons of different
Yeah.
potential decisions. So the parent, you got to realize this, help them work through that. When they're older and it's age appropriate, you can tell them, I know this is a tough decision, but whatever decision you make will be the correct one because it's your decision, right? It doesn't have to be the be all and end all of your life necessarily. So, but that's because they're constantly taking in and processing data, and this is a constant process, so they can reach a conclusion today and tomorrow reach a different conclusion, right?
Mm,
So at some point you have to stop that process and make a decision, and they're afraid of making the wrong decision because they're constantly taking in data. So that's something to be aware of. Like it's very hard, it can be hard for air sign kids to kind of make a snap decision, and
mm,
you may not get their real answer because you're forcing them to make a decision and they're not ready to do it. It's just a dynamic you need to be aware of. I mean, sometimes you have to make a call and you have to make a call, right?
yeah.
But to the extent the parent can kind of help them work through that process or at least validate it, like I know you always have something on your mind. I know it's hard for you to make, last minute
Yeah.
decisions. If you're validating that
Yeah.
child feels like, oh, the parent gets what I'm going through. And even though this is tough for me, and we don't necessarily have a solution for this right now, they at least understand what it's like for me. And that goes a long way, right? That kind of
Yeah.
emotional validation.
Oh my gosh, yeah, validation. The V word is so big too. I think in all these across the board, it's like validating how the child feels and how
Yeah.
they're feeling and what they're experiencing. And I imagine with the air signs, communication is key, and a lack of that can feel like or create an insecurity if they're not getting some form of communication or
Mm-hmm.
acknowledgement of what you were saying, like recognizing,
Mm-hmm.
I know you're thinking about a lot of things and it's hard to make a decision, and sort of acknowledgement can go a long way. And that words and how you speak to your child would
Right.
be very important to that attachment,
Oh, right.
right?
Right. Exactly. Yeah. And just being available when they want to talk to you. And you're not, I mean, sometimes parent, you can't just drop everything at that second,
Mm-hmm.
but to the extent you can be available when your air sign child wants to talk. And if you can be available right then, you can tell them, hey, I really want to talk about this. I really want to hear what you have to say. Just give me a few minutes
Yeah.
and I'm going to finish this and we're going to meet and I'd like to
Yeah.
hear this. So that's okay. You're still telling them, hey, what you want to talk about, your bid for connection is important to me.
Yeah.
I just need to finish right what I'm doing
Yeah.
right now, and then we can do this. Yeah.
Yeah, it makes me think a little bit also about our love language and how
Yes.
that's developed, right? So,
Yes.
your fire signs might be more showing affection or demonstrative in their expression of their feelings. We are,
Mm-hmm.
and air signs may be able to communicate it, but not necessarily in big ways or in ways that, or are as romantic or out highly expressive, but say the words but maybe don't put the action behind it. And
Mm-hmm.
so it's recognizing and understanding our love language, which can be seen through the moon and the way
Right.
our attachment style as well. I think what we
Oh,
need to
right.
feel safe and secure and loved is our love language. So the moon plays a big role in figuring out what our love language is. I
Oh,
know
yeah.
Venus is relationships, and that's a big proponent, but really the moon and how we feel in relationship, our parental bonds and relationships, and then how we develop them in relationships as we get older, friendships and whatever, is how we feel in those relationships, right?
Right. Right.
So again, understanding our love language, I think, is a real, dot to connect here too in terms
Right.
of attachment style. So I feel like
Oh,
those
yeah.
could be really interesting, and then connecting those to the attachment style that you have or that you experienced growing up or what have you. But
Mm-hmm.
love language, I think, plays a role too.
Oh,
Would you
yeah.
say?
Absolutely. I mean, people, like, I've seen it where people in relationships, like one person will be like, well, I'm doing all these things for you. I mean, why aren't you pleased with this? And the other person may be like, well, you may like, acts of service is a love language term for
Yes.
it, but I need physical touch. That's my love language. So if you're providing acts of service to somebody because that's what your love language is, like that's it for me, acts of service, right? people do things without me asking them to do it. The other person may be just misinterpreting that. You may be doing
Yep.
something and you may think you're showing love and affection, but to the other person, they prefer
Yep.
to receive the love and affection a different way. And that's what the love languages will tell you. So, yeah, really
Absolutely.
important stuff to know. Yep.
Yeah, yeah. Because I have a lot of air, and I know
Yeah.
that, you know, but quality time and that,
Mm-hmm.
communication is a big thing for me. Quality time,
Right.
definitely like physical touch. But I remember like I was like, oh, we're all different variables of that.
Right.
Same way we're all
Right.
variables of attachment style, right? So there's those two different things. We're all sort of a unique blend of, but there's
Mm-hmm.
always a dominance usually in one area,
Yes.
right?
Yes,
Or the other.
exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so let's go
Yep.
into earth and water. What do you want to do first?
Sure. We could do Earth. So yeah, so these are your, Capricorn, Virgo, and Taurus,
Mm-hmm.
right? Signs, feminine energy signs. So it's more kind of a feeling, intuitive energy. These children are also pretty tactile, really more
Yeah.
connected to the Mother Earth archetype we think about. They like physical contact with the parents when they're young. These are children that need a ton of stability in the home life. They don't do well if it is a chaotic, ever
Yeah.
changing, constantly changing household. So they need a
Yeah.
lot of stability. I mean, all kids need stability, but earth signs more than most need the stability, and they need to know what's coming next. They like the predictability.
Yes.
Like, this is happening today, tomorrow I know what's happening. They don't do as well with kind of last minute changes and things like that. So yeah, they need to know what's coming next, what to expect. Can be stubborn,
Mm-hmm.
can be, especially Cap and Virgo, I find they can have this tendency to like think they know better than the parents, right? And
Little
this tendency
adults.
because, right, I mean, Capricorn is like they're young when they're old when they're young, and they're young when they're
And they're
old,
old. Yep.
right? So when they're young kids, the Cap kids are so serious. I mean, that's parents tell me all the time. They're so serious. That's the nature of Cap. It's just a
Yes.
more serious energy, right? At least when they're young.
Yep.
So they love to be independent. They love to do things for themselves, especially
Yeah.
Cap and Virgo. So parents, I would say the parents should encourage earth sign kids to, be independent as soon as they show that they're ready, show the willingness to be independent, encourage that as early as possible, as early as, developmentally appropriate, right? As long
Yeah.
as the kid is ready for it, right?
Right.
Cap and Virgo especially like to do things for themselves.
Yeah.
They do not respond well to the helicopter parenting. They want to be able to, they like to be able to be in charge of themselves, right?
Yes.
Um, so these kids could also be sorry.
That's okay.
These kids these kids can also be a stabilizing influence for the parent, interestingly.
Hmm.
And these children, I find, especially Cap and Virgo, more than other energies, there's more of a propensity for the parent to parentify the child, because
Mm.
Cap and Virgo especially are very comfortable taking on responsibility. It's an
Yeah.
energy that is comfortable with responsibility, even when they're kids, even like responsibility beyond what is age appropriate. They feel responsible, loyal, and committed to the family. So they are comfortable with taking on the added responsibility. And the parent, like what you were saying about earlier, Dominique, with fire signs, the parent will see, oh, they're comfortable with this, I'm just going to give them more
Right.
responsibility. And then it can surpass what is appropriate for the child. And the parent may not realize the child is under extreme stress
Yeah.
because you are giving them adult level responsibility that they appear to be okay with.
Yeah.
But you have to really think about, is it okay for, for example, them to decide what the family spends its money on? No. I mean, that's, when you sit
Yes.
down and be like, and I've heard this from some adults. Oh yeah, they were like, oh, my family would sit us down at 12 when I was 12 years old and ask me, well, this is how much money we have. We don't have enough money to pay the bills. So what should we spend it on? You're asking a 12-year-old this question? Like, can you imagine the stress on the child? Like, if the
Yeah.
parents don't know who, I mean, we're screwed here, right?
Yeah.
So it's a real issue I see with a lot when parents have earth sign kids, because you really need to make sure that you're not giving the kids too much responsibility, because they don't always speak up, right? And then they may start to feel like they're the parent. I've seen that dynamic play out too, where now
Yeah.
they feel like they're parenting the parent, and that's obviously unhealthy. This is kind
Right.
of a rupture in the attachment. The parent should not be the one being parented by the kid. So it's always something I like to point out with earth sign energy, just because I see the dynamic play out. Yeah, so
Oh, that's true. That's a good one. Yeah, I was thinking, and maybe finding that healthy balance of being helpful, wanting to be helpful and being responsible, and then making sure that they have fun, that they go
right.
play, which can be very difficult. It's like cut loose, relax, and not worry so
Mm-hmm.
much about
Right.
all those things,
Right.
so it's like, hey, you are the kid, I appreciate you, but
Right.
you've done enough, go have some fun, this, I'll take care of this, so it's again
Right.
an awareness where you can affect change, or be more helpful, and not
Right.
allowing that to go overboard, and so that they then become, in relationships down the line, being total the doers, doing everything, and then burnt out and feeling,
Yeah.
responsible for every little
Right.
thing. And,
Right.
and it's not fun, and then they
Yeah.
get, like you said, they get younger as they get
Right.
older, and they can start to
Right.
relax. So
Right.
it's a natural flow for them. But at the same time, you want to encourage that healthy attachment. Go, hey, I'm the parent here. You
Right.
don't have to do the adulting yet.
Right.
And again, rewards, right? Appreciation and rewards for that. But then recognizing, hey, you've done this. Do you feel like rewards can work better for the Capricorn and the Earth signs? And if you're
Certainly
careful with food.
money always works with Capricorn people.
Yes, that's what I'm saying. And
So
food would
money
work with Taurus,
always
so you got to
works,
be careful.
but it's kind of like, so as we were talking about earlier, I mean, not reward for like run of the mill chores, but like, hey, I have this big project.
Yes.
I hire my son out all the time for these big projects to help with my business. And I'm like, this is great that I don't have to do this. Like, this is
Yes.
great, right? Not run of the mill stuff. But yeah, I mean, Earth energy in general, Cap especially, very money motivated,
Yeah.
right? I mean, Mike said he's like 13. He's already asking like when he can get a job. I'm like, okay,
Yeah.
so when can I get a job to make my own money, right? So I always joke because he has a Gemini moon in the second house, right? I always joke. I said you were always hustling for money, always. It's hilarious. So yeah, I mean, I think because of the nature of the energy, yeah, rewards will work well. Again, you just want to make sure you're not overdoing the rewards.
Yeah.
You're fostering internal motivation. You want to praise the effort,
Yeah.
right? Not,
Yeah.
for example, praising looks or praising intelligence. You don't want to do that as much. I don't want to sit here and say never tell your child, oh, you're so smart,
Of
but
course.
you want to praise that. You don't want to praise those things as much as the effort. Oh, you worked really hard on this. I can
Yeah.
see you studying a lot for this. You making an effort for this,
Yeah.
right? Things like that. That's gonna be better for working on the internal and developing the internal motivation than the
Right.
external, that relying on the external motivation. Because again, when they're adults,
Yeah.
right, you don't want them to be it's just not healthy for them to like never do what they're supposed to do because it's nothing in it for them. It's like, what's in it for me if I do this,
Right.
right? That's just not a healthy way to live, not an ultimately fulfilling way to live.
Yes. Oh, that's good. Okay, so let's dive into some water
Yes.
signs of Cancer, Scorpio, and Pisces.
Yes, these kids, as we've kind of been hinting through the video, need a lot of close contact with the parents when they're little. These are the babies that are going to want to be on top of the parent, sleep on the parent, right?
Yep.
You're going to have them in the baby carrier while you're doing other stuff. When my son was little, who, as everybody knows, he's a Scorpio, that is the only way I could get things done in the house was I would put him on the carrier and I would just do
Ah.
the chores, and he would eventually sleep in the carrier, right?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, they need a lot of close contact with the parents. They bond very closely with the parents. And when they're older, don't be surprised if you still have this bond. It may not be as tactile, right? But they always want to know where the parent is. Even in the house, they'll want to know, oh,
Oh
where's
yeah.
my mom? Oh, she's in the kitchen. Okay. And then they're like, I can go, I'm relaxed now.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not
Oh yeah.
anxious because I don't know where mom is or where dad is,
Yeah.
right? But
Yeah.
those kids want to know where the parents are, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so if you're separated from the kids for any length of time, when they're older, it's a good idea for them to have some, way of contacting you, whether it's an old phone or something,
Yeah.
so they can contact you
Yeah.
when it's just so they can stay in touch with the parent, that so they're not anxious, because they tend to have a little bit of anxiety if they just can't reach the parent or don't know where the parent is, right? When's mom or dad coming home, or that kind of thing. So you don't want to push them to be independent too soon. So kind of in our society, I think American society
Yeah.
mostly, there's this push for kids to like be independent really early on. And it's great. We're raising independent adults. That's true. But kind of the counterintuitive thing you mentioned earlier, Dominique, is kids need the strong attachment to exercise the independence.
Yeah.
So you don't want to push kids to be independent and do something before they're ready to do it. So if you're forcing them to go, no, you don't need this, you don't need me to do this for you. You could do this on your own, or you don't need my help with this, or you don't even
Right.
need me to explain this to you. You're rejecting a bid for connection, but also you're
Yeah.
pushing them to be independent before they feel ready.
Ready.
And if they don't feel ready, there's a reason why they don't feel ready. They're feeling insecure. Maybe the attachments could be more secure or something else. But don't push these kids to be independent before they're ready. Okay. The best way to get them to try something new is for them to see the parents doing it, or for them to see their peers doing it. Right.
Yeah.
Then they'll be like, oh, well, they're doing it. They look like they're having fun. I'm going to try it. Because the water sign kids can be a little reticent to try new things. It's just more of a reserved energy. Right.
Yeah.
So those are things to
Oh, that's
be
true.
aware of. Also, really important to teach them healthy boundaries, because with the water energy, it's hard for the kids to know sometimes like where they end and the parent begins, because it tends to
Yes.
flow together. That's just the nature of water.
Mm-hmm.
So teach healthy boundaries even when they're little. Please, I don't like that, please don't touch my face, or whatever, right? And that was my big thing. Just, I don't want to be touched in the face right now. so
Yes.
and that's going to model healthy boundaries for them, because when they're older, they
Yep.
will be able to be in relationships with healthy boundaries and make sure other people respect their boundaries, right?
Right.
So those very important for water
Mhm.
energy.
Oh yeah.
Again, help them develop their own sense of self-identity, because again, they tend to identify very strongly closely with the parents. So as they get older, middle school years, they tend to internalize their own value system a little more. You want to encourage them to seek, develop their own sense of self, their own sense of identity,
Yes.
and support them, even if they come to, even if they have values that are different from the parents. That's they're separate. Like, as we teach astrology, kids are separate entities, they are separate beings, right?
Yeah.
You can support them in developing their own sense of self, right? Because I see parents who the kids didn't follow their religion, for example. The parents are very disappointed. Well, they're their own separate beings, they're going to have their own separate life experience.
Yeah.
So that's kind of, I would not, certainly not recommend kind of withholding affection from the kids because
Right.
you are, feeling insecure about
Oh,
that as a parent, things
oh
like that.
yeah. For
um and also, because of the depth of feeling that water sign children experience, as we said earlier, validate feelings. They
yes.
have big emotions sometimes. They tend to have these kind of, can be dramatic, emotional outbursts even when they're older. That's normal for the energy. Validate feelings. I totally understand why you feel that way. You have the right to feel that way.
Mm-hmm.
Help them identify the feeling, articulate the feeling, let it go,
Yes.
right? Because with
Yes.
water energy, there's a tendency to dwell in it, right? Dwell on the feelings, dwell on the
Oh yeah.
past. So you want to teach them to deal with that in a healthy way.
Oh yeah, for sure, the validating feelings, and also validating that when they don't know why they feel a certain way,
Right.
what they're feeling exactly, they just feel something off or feel something
Right.
down.
Oh yeah.
You know me, I have an Uber Pisces child, so we
Mm-hmm.
get that a lot where he feels kind of in a funk and he doesn't know
Yeah.
why. And I know coming home from school and having a lot of that energy just sort of absorbing, they're sponges, they absorb
Yes.
everything, right? So
Yes.
they don't know what they're feeling or why they feel very out of it. And it's because they've just absorbed so much.
Right. Right.
For sure. So that healthy boundary is so important. And then also, the other thing I was going to say, um, validating feelings, but there was something else. Oh, I know. Trust.
Mm-hmm.
That brings in that element of trust we were talking about is really, really important, especially for Scorpio, and that safety and trust that they're okay, or that they have you to come back to. So
Right.
I feel like what we were talking about earlier about trust, the trust element can be really extra powerful
Right.
for water signs. Yeah, for the
I
water
think so.
or heavy water element of that.
Right.
because Scorpio really their need to control or has to do with needing to feel trust,
Mm-hmm.
and security and not wanting to be vulnerable,
Right.
and fear of being hurt and stuff like that. And that's where that I think that reticence and that shyness can come. It's just being afraid that they're going to be hurt or not seen or loved or heard or
Mm-hmm.
respected or what have you. And finding a sense of belonging, which is the Cancer, needing
Yeah.
to feel they
Yeah.
belong. So when you feel like you belong in your family, you can go out in the world and know you belong, feel a little bit more like you belong, right? And feel like
Exactly.
you have to prove
Right.
yourself or
Right.
doing things that aren't comfortable or that just are feel inauthentic,
Right. Right. You belong and you're accepted how you are.
accepted how you
Exactly.
are.
Yep.
And so then when you go out into the world and you're in groups, you kind of carry that sense of self acceptance, and because you have that bond and that attachment with healthy attachment with your family, you go out into a situation in the world where you know who you are.
Exactly.
And so you're not necessarily looking to fill that up or figure that out
Mm-hmm.
through looking, talking to your peers even,
Exactly.
right?
Exactly.
and
Right.
and being a follower or trying to like identify with, others. So if there's
Right.
this, we talk about identity a lot with Pisces and the water sign because it's very
Mm-hmm.
dissolving, and
Mm-hmm.
that's the hard
Yeah.
boundary between what is
Yeah.
you and what is me, and so you can easily end up thinking or feeling that one thing which is not you at all,
Yeah.
and being sucked into situations that are not who you are or want to be. And that's I think one of the biggest things about water signs is being very aware of who they spend time with, who are their
Absolutely.
friends and the influence of their friends, and are their friends as caring and considerate and understanding of who they are,
Mm-hmm.
because that could cause a lot of, I think, issues and problems in their friendships, and then therefore even in relationships where they end up, you know, not feeling truly, validated and supported in how they're feeling.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And you brought up something really interesting, Dominique, for water sign kids, which is really important for parents, which is completely lost my train of thought. Hold on.
I did the same
I
thing.
had it and then it like woo.
It'll come back to you. That's what I did too. I was
Oh
like,
my
wait a minute.
God. Um oh, so because as you said, they absorb other people's
Yes.
emotions, is to teach them to observe instead of absorb that
Oh, I
stuff.
love
Like
it.
observe it clinically, because that will just burn you out if you're constantly absorbing the energy for other people, right? As
Yeah. Yeah. I
almost
always
everybody
tell my
knows.
son, like, step back, just,
Right.
kind of save
Observe
yourself, observe.
things
Mm-hmm.
curiously, right? From this
That's a good
place of,
point.
oh, this is interesting, as opposed to absorbing it, right?
Oh, that's
And we all do that to some degree, right? With our partners and
sure.
our kids. It's hard not to. But to the extent you could, like you said, step back and observe this
Yeah.
as opposed to absorbing it yourself and having it weigh you down, right? Or affect you.
Absolutely. I mean, what is the scientific? Our bodies are made up mostly of water, right? So
Right.
of course we
Right.
emotionally, we
Right.
energetically
Oh yeah.
feel, it's just how that energy isn't transferred and worked with or, managed within ourself,
Right.
within our
Right.
energy, right? And then in our
Absolutely.
relationships. Um,
Absolutely.
yeah, attachment is rich and there's a lot to it. And I'm sure we've only scratched the surface,
Oh yeah.
but I'm sure we've also like probably chatted for like over an hour, but this was really good. And I hope that I think we can probably wrap up and, hopefully have given a lot of great practical guidance and insight and tips about what it is, how to navigate it, and maybe even how to look at the astrology a little bit in understanding it better for ourselves as parents and
Right.
our children, and looking at our upbringing and that the whole cycle. And definitely, like, all of Gabor's work, you can go on YouTube and watch his
Mm-hmm.
videos, right? There's just so much um great content that he puts out there, and this book is great. I'm just barely
Yeah.
touched surface, so check that out. Do you have any closing thoughts? I think we'll wrap it up.
Yeah, I would say like there's so much information about parenting, how to parent, parenting tips and things like this. And then we get a lot, parents get a lot of, instruction from mostly well-meaning people like grandparents,
Sure.
other things. And, some of it's good, some of it's not as good. But I find that parents, especially moms, our instincts are spot on much of the
Mm,
time. So if people are telling you things, or this is what you should do, or this is how you handle it, you know, look at your instinct. Like, how would you instinctually do this? And, I had this idea of how I would parent, like before I had kids. But when you have the child, a lot of it, instinctually, this is right or this is
yep.
not right. So I would start with that. Start with your
Always.
intuition, right?
Yep.
And your instinct, even more than how you were parented. Because we start to parent how we were parented, unless like we're talking about, that there were issues with how you were parented and you identify that and then you work to recondition yourself from that. And a lot of that comes with intuition. Like I had moments where I was like, I am not handling this right. Like, I don't like this. I don't like how I'm handling this. I don't like what this is doing to my relationship with my kid. There has got to be a better way to handle this. And your instinct is right. Your intuition is right
Mhm.
so much of the time. And I think we're constantly feeling like our intuition is not trustworthy because we're bombarded with so much information all the time.
That's so true.
So, listen to what your intuition is telling you. And even if that's going against what most other people are saying, don't let that stop you from making parenting decisions or deciding how to parent or how to attach, right? Because it's
Yeah.
right a lot of the time. So
Absolutely. And it
it's hard.
happens naturally. Like you said, it's
Yes,
a natural
yes,
process. And
right,
I totally agree. Like we can, as parents absorb all the parenting information. I would read the parenting books and be like, that doesn't make sense. And that's why
right,
astrology was so great because it could
right,
really help me pull things out of books that actually I could work with that
right,
made sense and throw away the rest. Right. It kind of would
right,
validate what I was learning about my child's unique nature.
right,
So that's a benefit. But being really trusting our own intuition and recognizing that it's going to happen naturally. And if you are really on this path of wanting to be a conscious, aware, healthy parent and create healthy attachment and relationships with your kids, you are doing it. The
right,
simple fact that you are in that mindset and you are making that effort, you are doing it,
right.
and to
Exactly.
have that acceptance and compassion for yourselves. And
Right.
I know that before we close out, you actually have a new program that you're starting to do to help parents. Would you like to share that?
Thank you, Dominique. Appreciate that. Yes, I am actually opening up 5 coaching slots for my program, which is called Thriving After Trauma, right? Which is to help parents, specifically parents, kind of work on the specific steps to heal from their trauma and then use what they've learned to be better parents. And
Yeah.
so we hear a lot about this, right? You need to heal from your trauma and heal from your negative conditioning. But then I have parents ask me, I don't know what to do in this situation.
Right.
Like, what should I do? Or how should I handle this? Or
Mm,
what do I say? Right. And an example is like, well, people are constantly, intruding over my boundaries, or they're asking me questions I'm not comfortable answering them. Well, don't answer them. Okay, well, but these people ask them in such a way that makes it really difficult for me not to answer. Well, I'm developing like scripts for this, things like this. Like, here's what you say,
ah,
right? Things like this. That's just one example.
oh, that's great.
But so I had a lot of people, I'm active on YouTube with my YouTube channel. I've had a lot of people there ask me for these things like coaching or courses. So yeah, I'm very excited about this.
Oh,
And right
that's
now I
great.
can take 5 people, 4 or 5 people, and then I'll be opening it up to more in the future. But if anybody's interested in it, you can email me at maria@lawschoolheretic.com. You can
Okay.
find me on YouTube. I'll give you my YouTube link. And I've got like an intro video on this to kind of explain the program with a couple like helpful specific tips parents can kind of start
Okay,
using right
cool.
away.
I'll put all that in the show notes for this for
Thank
sure.
you.
I
Thank
know
you so
that
much.
we did post it in the Conscious Parenting with Astrology
Yes.
moms group. So if you're in there, you can go and check it out right away. But I'll also put it in the show notes so they can easily get to it as well.
Awesome. Thank you,
Awesome.
Dominique.
Oh, you're welcome. This is so great. Thank you, Maria. And I know we'll do
Thank
more
you.
together. And let us
Absolutely.
know if you have, thoughts about any of the stuff we shared today, questions. And as we're going to be moving into breaking these down even more, feel free to ask questions about your child's, if there's a heavy element you're question about, or, the attachment styles in general. And, maybe we can answer those in some future videos.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Thanks, Maria. And we'll see you on the next one, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening, and I hope you gained some great astrology insight and inspiration from today's show. I'd love to hear, so drop me a comment or share in a review. Check out the show notes for all the details and links about today's episode, how you can connect with me on social or work with me directly. And don't forget to like, follow, and subscribe. Oh, and for my moms out there, be sure to join my private Conscious Parenting with Astrology Moms group on Facebook. Come join a growing community of like-minded mamas supporting each other in the hardest job in the world with the help of astrology. Hope to see you over there. Take care and keep nurturing the nature, friends. I'll see you on the next episode.